Going to go ahead and call this meeting of the Whitefish City Council to order for April 17th, 2023. Thanks everyone for joining us this evening. We're both meeting in person. Thanks for joining us in person and as well as remotely via Teams. Our first item on the agenda is our Pledge of Allegiance. David Hunt, do you mind leading us this evening in our pledge? Thank you very much, David. We do have 2 public hearings advertised for this evening, but now is your time to approach the council with any items that are not advertised on the agenda, including our public hearings. So anything you wish to share, please, for the record, your name and address when you approach the podium, please.
Good evening. My name is Nancy Schuber, and my address is 110 Bay Point Drive. 2 weeks ago, Council approved the Convention and Visitor Bureau's public budget. The bed tax revenue from the state is around $300,000. 2 years ago, our city attorney, Ms. Jacobs, asked them to contact their businesses to state voluntary or optional on all receipts next to the 1% CSF, as it's now called, the Community Sustainability Fund, at restaurants, lodging, and car rentals. They are still not compliant with all businesses. 2 years. Have you ever asked for it to be removed from your bill? It's very difficult. Call the manager. Waitress, I don't know how to do it. Well, we have to get a second manager. Well, I can't do that. If you ask a server, what is this CSF on my receipt, they'll most likely tell you, oh, it goes towards housing, because that's what they're told to tell you. The truth is, 6% of their $1.2 million budget goes to housing. And I know you asked that percent in the meeting 2 weeks ago when they did their presentation, and Rhonda Fitzgerald did not know the percentage. 75,000. The CSF revenues are around 900,000 per year. That's what they take in on the 1%. They have 1.3 million in the bank. Enough is enough. This tourism promotion adversely affects the quality of life for those living in our community. Even if they call it sustainable tourism, it's still marketing. Any publicity is good publicity. Go to the Convention and Visitor Bureau's meetings, second Monday of the month, 2:30, right here, unless they move it, and see the marketing they're doing. The CSF was called the TPA, Tourism Promotion Assessment, when it started in 2007. The purpose was to enhance the marketing for the shoulder and winter season. Would somebody please take my purse outside? They talk shoulder season to justify their spending, but we all know there's no shoulder season anymore. Why not give our residents a fair chance to opt out of this fee? We can't vote on it, like the resort tax, because it's not a tax. Explore Whitefish, as they prefer to be called, is a 501c3, a charitable organization. Do you know any charity that automatically imposes a donation on receipts, forcing the consumer to ask for it to be removed? I mean, think about it. It's the other way around. Most of us prefer to pick our own charities. We asked the council to reassess the need for the CSF. They'll still always have the state bed tax of $300,000 or more to work with. At minimum, make it an add-on versus a takeaway. So what I mean by that is, like when you go to the grocery store checkout, and at the end of your checkout, do you want to add $1 to Explore Whitefish? Do you want to add $5? Do you want to do it that way instead of automatically sticking it on and having to go through hoops to get it off. So if you can't get rid of it, I ask that you consider making it an add-on at the end of the transaction. That would give all of us an easier way to opt out. Ask yourselves, do we really need to spend $1.2 million per year on tourism promotion anymore? I think not. We think not. Thank you.
Thanks, Nancy. Appreciate your comments. Further public comment this evening?
Hi, I'm Mary Armstrong, and I live at the Montera. Last week, I wrote an email to John Mofield and Craig Workman about the poor condition of River Lakes Parkway. John was kind enough to email me back and say that he thought that there was going to be an update tonight at the meeting and invited me to come. So I'm here, hopefully, for an update.
I think Craig Workman, our Public Works Director, was going to address it later in the evening.
Okay.
Craig, if you'd like to take the opportunity now, if you do have an update so that Mary doesn't need to stick around, that would be good.
Sure.
Okay. And I just think that I'd like to know what the priority is for short-term repairs now, for the spring, and also for longer-term plans, because with the addition of the new pickleball fields and the North Valley Music School that's going in on River Lakes Parkway, I think the traffic's going to be increased a lot more. So, Thank you.
Thanks, Mary. Craig, would you like to address that now or later in the meeting?
I can address it now.
Okay. Were you planning on providing an update?
I didn't have anything prepared to update council on this issue, but we have received numerous concerns from residents in the River Lakes community, and there's no doubt that road's completely blown up this winter. It happens every spring when the frost comes out of the ground, but this year in particular, it seems like there's more areas that have completely rubbleized. And unfortunately, we can't repair those until the hot mix plants open up. There's really not much we can do with pothole repair when the when the damage is that excessive. And so it is on our list to make those repairs as soon as we see asphalt plants open up, which this year will likely be the first week of May. I know that the HOA and the HOA manager have addressed council and the resort tax committee regarding this area, and so we are considering some reprioritization of our resort tax priority roadways, and so that will likely be coming to council as well in the near future. So there are 2 intersections specifically that we agreed to completely reconstruct. We finished one of them last fall. That was the intersection of Voyager and Tumble Home, I believe. And then we lost our weather window. So there's another intersection that we'll be redoing, which is the intersection of River Lakes Parkway and River Lakes Drive here in the next month or so. We have a contract with Watson Excavation to finish that work. So that will be completed as we had promised the HOA this year.
Great. Thanks, Craig. Appreciate the update. So, Mary, I don't think anything will get solved this evening, but maybe just stay tuned and keep in touch with the HOA manager, who has been to several of our meetings in the past. So. Okay. Maybe connect the dots. Yep. Okay, great. Do you mind approaching the podium just so you're on public record, please? Sorry.
So how do I find out if anything's going to be discussed, or, so I can keep on top of this?
Reach out to Craig and we'll keep you informed, considering you are a separate HOA.
Okay.
And we can provide the contact information for the other HOA representative as well.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Mary. Appreciate your comments tonight. Further public comment this evening? Brian.
Hello again, Brian Schott, 708 Lupfer Avenue. I wasn't planning to make a public comment this evening, but I came to interview for the Sustainable Tourism Management Plan Committee, as you know. and saw the people on the corner and thought I should stick around for a second. Just for the record, I am a consultant for Explore Whitefish. I've worked with Explore Whitefish since its inception in 2006. I'm in charge of communications work, media work, and sustainability efforts. I just wanted to state that, my experience with the Visitor Bureau, everything that Explore Whitefish does is seen through the lens of how can we make this a more economically vibrant community throughout all seasons, taking pressure off of the summer season. And although our shoulder seasons, aren't as low as they used to go, certainly there is, room for, some filler. People are always surprised that hotel occupancies are at 50% during the low seasons. In terms of the Sustainable Tourism Management Plan that Explore Whitefish launched, we're going to come back to the table and really benchmark, reprioritize issues of importance, update the data, reassess what's next, and really engaging the community and offering opportunities to talk about how do we keep Whitefish centered on the people who live here, make it continually livable while welcoming visitors. We really want to create a short-term work plan for the Sustainable Tourism Management Plan, work with city staff in terms of all things. And right now the pressure has really come off in terms of that crush we felt in 21. And I think it's time we can take a breath, reprioritize what we're trying to do as a community with tourists, with new residents. The influx of new residents has really also changed the dynamics of our community. And just since I was here, and for the record, I just wanted to state that we're working really, really hard at Explore Whitefish to do everything we can to make this a brighter future for all of us. So thank you.
Thanks, Brian. Appreciate the comments. Further public testimony this evening? Any volunteer board reports from the audience? Not seeing any. How about the council?
I will just say that the planning board, we will have a work session before the planning board meeting this Thursday to discuss the communication plan about the growth policy update, if anybody's interested in attending that. And then we'll have our normal meeting after that. So this will be our first meeting of updating the growth policy, but we'll just be talking about the communication plan.
And what time does that start?
Starts at 5 o'clock.
5 o'clock, okay. Thanks, Steve. Further board reports from the council? Not seeing any, I'll move on to the consent agenda. You have the minutes from the April 3rd, both the special and regular meeting minutes. Is there a motion?
I move to approve the minutes from the April 3rd meeting.
Is there a second?
I'll second it.
Seconded by Councilor Caltabiano. Further discussion? All those in favor, please raise your hand. Those opposed, like sign, and that motion does carry unanimously, which brings us on to our first public hearing of the evening, which will be ordinance 23-05, an ordinance rezoning approximately 11.12 acres of land in a portion of a 31.17 acre unaddressed, undeveloped parcel located west of Highway 93 South and south of the Park Knoll subdivision and known as Track 7A in the southeast quarter of the southwest quarter in Section 1, Township 30 North, Range 22 West, in Flathead County, Montana, that is zoned WCR-SC, which is our county residential with special conditions, to WERSC, the state residential district with special conditions, and adopting findings with respect to such rezone, and this is on a first reading. David.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. So yeah, as you mentioned, this is a rezone request of a portion of a 31-acre lot that's undeveloped, and it would be changed from a WCR with a special condition to a WER with a special condition, which is a state residential. The WCR is a 2.5 acre zoning. The estate residential is a 20,000 square foot minimum lot size. And then as part of the special conditions, the applicant has put together a statement of conditions that they would provide an additional 5-foot setback from what is normally required off of Park Knoll Lane, as well as a provision that only single-family housing would be developed adjacent to Park Knoll Lane west of future Baker Avenue intersection. And then after some feedback at the planning board meeting, he provided a new statement of conditions that would also provide an additional 10% setback off of the wetland as per required in the code. And so currently, with the WCR zoning, our water quality protection regulations, would require a 75-foot setback because it's low-density zoning. So the current zoning would require a 75-foot setback off of that wetland. The zoning that he is applying for, which is a WER, requires a 100-foot setback, and then with that additional 10%, that would be 110 feet. If it was high density, it'd be a 125-foot setback. So with the water quality ordinance, the higher the density, the bigger the setback that's required off of any kind of a wetland. So with the WCR zoning that's currently, it'd be a 75-foot setback, and what he's applying for would be a 100-foot setback off of there, 110%. So it'd be a 110-foot setback. As I mentioned, the zoning around this property to the north and the east is would remain the north and the east is WER currently, and then the remainder of that property will remain WCR, which is that country residential of 2.5 acres. As far as we sent out a public notice, we did receive one comment from a Park Knoll property owner that opposed the rezone. We got an additional letter opposing the rezone from the South Whitefish Neighborhood Association, and then we received a comment from the Park Knoll Homeowners Association that said they couldn't support it without more information. So looking at any rezone request, we look at findings of fact. Is this supported by the growth policy? The Highway 93 South Corridor Plan designated that area as a suburban residential, which is a future land use, and the estate residential, or the WER, fits into that suburban residential designation. So it is consistent with the growth policy. Public services are available nearby. The areas included in the city's extension of services plan. And these services will be extended as any future development occurs. It's now located in city limits, served by JP Road and Hedman Lane off of Highway 93 South. Looking at the appropriate use of land, again, this type of zoning was anticipated in the Highway 93 corridor plan. Looking at, commercial and higher density adjacent to 93, and then getting less and less dense the further away that it gets from there, going from suburban to rural residential as it gets further away. So staff did look at, meets the criteria for our zone change. We did recommend approval to the Whitefish Planning Board. They reviewed that rezone request on March 16th. And then there was a vote of 5-1 to recommend approval. And as I mentioned, there was a revised statement of conditions that is in your packet. And that packet does start on page 39 of your packet. So I'd be glad to answer any questions that you guys might have.
Thanks, Dave. Any questions for Dave on his staff report? Rebecca.
Dave, I remember asking you this before, but I can't remember. So it's 2.5 acres is WCR, and then what does WER convert to in terms of acreage? Because you're calling
So
it
it's
20,000
square feet, so it'd be basically a half acre lots.
Okay, that's.
An
yeah, now I
acre is
remember.
43,560 square feet, so it's just a little less than a half acre.
Okay. That's all I have
Right.
for now. Thank you.
And the applicant did state that this would be, when it does get developed, is going to be developed as a planned unit development. He owns, quite a few parcels in there, and along Baker Avenue is where the majority of the density would go. And so just because this particular portion of the lot's the zoning's getting changed, doesn't mean that there's going to be more density developed on that particular part of the lot. It just enables them to blend that density in other areas.
Ben.
How much of this property is delineated wetland?
I don't know the exact acreage. The applicant might be able to answer that. He did do a wetland delineation of a part of it. There's a stormwater conveyance, intermittent stream, wetland, whatever you want to call it. It doesn't flow year round, but it does run through, the majority of that property from one end to the other. It doesn't encumber the whole thing, but of that portion that is being rezoned.
And do you think our setback requirements and engineering standards are sufficient to make sure that there are not unnecessary impacts to that wetland?
Yeah, we adopted our water quality ordinance. We put significant setback requirements in there, buffer requirements, and then setbacks off the buffers for any development. As I mentioned, those setbacks are reduced for low-density development. They get bigger. Like I said, it's like a 75-foot requirement. Currently, it'd go to 100 feet if this zoning's changed to WCR, and then with his special conditions, it adds an additional 10% of whatever that setback is. So I think that's sufficient. It's the same as it is everywhere else within the city for those types of sensitive areas.
Can I address that quickly? When a developer or a project requires a wetland delineation, the wetland delineation's performed by a consultant. The consultant doesn't make the determination of whether or not it's jurisdictional under Section 404 of the Clean Water Act. That falls in the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers' purview. So the wetland delineation is submitted, then the Corps makes the jurisdictional determination. When we adopted our water quality ordinance, we acknowledge that isolated wetlands that are not considered jurisdictional by the Corps are equally important for water quality protection. So our ordinance is actually more restrictive than the Army Corps' jurisdictional criteria. And so in this case, even if it comes back as non-jurisdictional, meaning the Corps doesn't have authority, our own water quality ordinance will provide setbacks and policies to protect water quality in the critical stormwater conveyance. So just wanted to make sure people understood that it's really not our determination up here to make in terms of whether it's jurisdictional or not. That's a separate process that has to go through the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. We can only do what we can do here locally with our own ordinance. Rebecca, did you have a question?
I have a question for you, if you would take it.
Maybe.
Well, I sat in on a lot of the critical area ordinance meetings, and we have the absolute minimum standards, is what I remember, because there was so much pushback from the real estate and development community.
That's not true. Actually, we have some of the more restrictive, setbacks for the Whitefish River compared to what other municipalities have adopted.
I mean, 75 feet.
And or 100, whichever is greater once you get below JP Road, when we did have that under jurisdiction. But no other community I'm aware of actually has water quality ordinance protections for isolated wetlands like we do, much less stream setbacks.
And then
They far exceed county requirements.
So the other thing that I've always thought of since that time is that it takes 7 years to reclaim a wetland that's been ruined, and 2 times the amount of surface area to actually reclaim it adequately. So if we don't do it right, we ruin it forever.
Where did you get that data?
From that meeting, yeah.
Oh, okay.
Because we hired the person from Washington?
Yep, I do.
So it just stuck with me because I was shocked at how important wetlands are to the topography. And because they filter so much water, and once they are ruined, we don't really get the chance to get them back because we're building straight up to the edge of them. So, but you're the hydrologist. I just have been interested in them since that time because they're so important for the amount of water that we get through this area.
Thanks, Rebecca. Further questions for Dave on his staff report? Not seeing any. We did advertise for a public hearing on what will be ordinance 23-05. I do see the applicant is present. Carter, do you have anything to add to Dave's staff report, or would you like to address the council? I'd prefer it beforehand, if possible, and then if we have follow-up questions, we can always call you back up. Thanks.
Mayor Mulfield, councilors, my name is Carter Unger. I reside a third of the month at 2375 Mountain Shadows Drive. It seems the 2 main questions here today are on appropriate density and what that means as far as change in this community, and wetland protections. The Army Corps of Engineers, from what I understand, does have just received the application from a very reputable source, and I am hoping to get that back ASAP. Things are just taking a little longer. As you are aware, and David Taylor mentioned, I passed Planning Commission 5-1 last month, and while clearly I am not going to be building in any wetlands, and I wanted to help set community members at ease, so I voluntarily added in an additional 10% to the city's requirement, which, as David points out, is better protected by going from WCR to WER, by going from 75-foot setback to 100. I didn't ask for any neighbors' support in exchange for that. I shared that additional condition with what I might call one of the more concerned neighbors in the area who has representation here often, and didn't ask for any support in return for that. I believe it's just the right thing to do. And I look forward to hopefully passing tonight, and I hope unanimously, so we can send a message in regards to density and change. I'll be very quick, and I won't bring up all the paperwork I shared with the Planning Commission. I believe you all know the challenges Whitefish face. I listened in on some of the interviewees for the sustainable tourism. The same thing came up every time. Heard one gal speak of how she used to live here, now can't afford to. In the last 5 days, a friend of mine that I first met here has been evicted that is across from one of your all's business. He's a Whitefish character, but has a heart of gold. A restaurant establishment, which again, I don't want to call out any names, but some of you are honorary members at. Amazing manager who I got to know. She's been evicted and struggling. And my family that lives up here just interviewed a nanny who has to drive from Kalispell every day because she wants her daughter to be able to attend Whitefish Christian Academy. In my humble opinion, as an outsider who is learning but does spend a lot of time learning, the change that's been happening in Whitefish and the harm that is perceived or not is less so about large lots and small lots, but the loss of the community, the loss of the people who grew up here and can't afford to live here anymore. And you all know those people. We see them every day. They help us out with all kinds of different jobs. And I think a little more density is needed desperately. So thank you for the opportunity.
Thanks, Carter. Appreciate it. Do you have a question for Carter? If you don't mind, Rebecca?
Yeah. So Carter, what with the information that you're going to get from the Army Corps of Engineer, I haven't been through that process. Well, years ago I went through it in my neighborhood, and it took them 4 months to get to our neighborhood to tell us it was an intermittent stream and wasn't affected by what was happening. But would they say, is that going to affect your build out of your project?
When I get the final determination from the Army Corps of Engineers, I will not be building within that or within now 110 feet of that if the zone change tonight happens. I will also say, and I don't mean to say correct the record, but there has been a narrative going on for a period of years, and I've heard 14 acres thrown out there. The last group who had come before you twice to rezone never did a wetland delineation, much to my unfortunateness, because I had to pay, that's so far been my largest sum as far as it goes on entitlement process. But when they didn't get their growth policy amendment, they never took any of the steps. They didn't do soil samples, vegetation samples. They kind of laid out a map of where they could see some wetness. The group I hired is beyond reputable. I told the last planning, Kegel Engineering, if you might happen to know them, husband-wife duo that used to teach the Army Corps of Engineer wetland program and care deeply about the environment. It's a lot less than 14, but it's a good segment, and I plan on increasing it and enhancing it and putting a trail system along it so that others can enjoy it at the appropriate distance and allow wildlife corridors. I have no goal to encroach upon it, but I also would invite anybody who would like to walk it with me over the next month. I did so, and it's pretty dry around most of it except for the corridor it goes through, which again I would like to enhance and make better for the community to enjoy.
Sure.
So you have to get a permit from the Army Corps of Engineer to build within a certain distance of it, or could you explain what you're waiting on? And
So I hired Kegel Engineering. They work out of Montana, Utah, and I'm probably messing it up. I'm like the planning commissioners. I believe I may have copied Whitefish City Council so you could see their pedigree and the quality of their work. They perform the tests, unfortunately, and it doesn't look great, and now it's on Google Images. They dug a bunch of holes throughout the whole property so they could test the soil levels, the water levels. the vegetation and not just look at how it looks during certain times of year when a lot of runoff comes down 93 and around from other properties. They then create that, and this is where, again, there's probably some people up here who know better than I. They create a map, if you will, describing the different types of soil, vegetation, water amounts, and then they submit that to the Army Corps of Engineers for approval. And then the Army Corps of Engineers, and why I couldn't fill in any holes for any neighbors who have to look at them, I'm sorry, but I'm told I have to leave them open so the Army Corps can come inspect if they so choose, if they have questions. And as soon as I can, fill those holes back in so people don't have to look at it. And it's too bad it got on Google Images. I will do that. But everything kind of slowed down. 2 months after I purchased this land, June 3rd, I hired them, and it took a little while, and it's just taking a while with the government process, but I hope to have that again. It was supposed to be in March. I'm still waiting on it. But I will not be building in plus the buffer, obviously. So hopefully with this greater density, I can push it to the east through PUD, towards Baker, towards 93, and leave as much of that wildlife corridor and possible trail system hopefully available to the community.
So Rebecca, the way that works is if he proposes to place any fill within the jurisdictional wetlands, if they determine it to be jurisdictional, there's a threshold that if he exceeds 0.1 acres of impact, he either has to mitigate or avoid. That's how that works.
Aren't they really behind, like on getting projects done? Because when I've called them previously, I thought they were months out.
I don't think we can speak to the schedule. That's not our role up here. But thanks, Carter.
Thank you, sir.
Appreciate
Thank you, councilors.
Yep. Public testimony? Michelle? Cheryl? Who's first?
Carol Watkins, 143 and 145 Old Morris Trail. I am the neighbor to the south, and I'm head of the South Whitefish Neighborhood Association. We have members in Great Northern Heights. This down?
There you
Better?
go.
Okay.
Thank you.
Members are in Great Northern Heights. They are Old Morris Trail. They are down Caro and to the north. So I have approximately 25 to 30 members on the board. And I'm not here to argue the housing, don't care. I'm just wanting to make sure that my wetlands, because my water comes south, and all of you should have the paperwork from 4 or 5 years ago. You've seen that flyover. You have seen the water that was in there this time of year. I'm assuming you have it in front of you or have looked at it. I hired a drone guy who has taken additional pictures. He took one about a month ago. There is running water under the ice. You can see it. I thought Lindsay was going to send it, but I don't think she did. I've hired my own hydrologist. He doesn't want to come out until May because that's when the flowers bloom. That's when you have your species of flowers, blooming plants, and he'll take soil samples. I know for a fact that they dug holes on August 17th last year, pretty dry, up where they were digging. They appear to have dug in one area bordering where it would be the wettest. My hydrologist, again, doesn't want to come out until there is a full blooming of flowers and species. My biggest concern is the fact that it's draining right now from above me across my pasture. I have 60 acres in conservation easement. So I feel like I have to hire my own hydrologist to protect what I have from further encroachment. I don't want it flooded. And if any of you remember 1996 and 12 foot of snow, all you have to do is drive across Hodgins, that lake that's out there. You can still see where the aquifer was filled and the rim on that pond, how far that 12 foot of snow went. So if you only allow him 100 feet, 110 feet, you're still going to have houses underwater the next time we have that much snow or rain. We've had dry years. There were cattails for years all over those properties. They're gone because of Western Building Center, Park Knoll, Great Northern Heights, a lot of that vegetation's gone. Right now, there's sandhill crane down there. There's bear that go through there. There's a herd of about 30 deer, birds all over the place. I'm not disputing his building. I just want further setbacks to keep anything from encroaching on my property and even downstream, because it goes straight to the river. You've got 2 miles of land there. And then you've got Lund who wants to do another subdivision. So you've got wetland issues all the way to the river. That's all I got to say. I just want my property protected. I've hired my hydrologist. I will compete with his hydrology report. He is also accredited out of Missoula. We also talked to a wetland specialist out of Helena. So that's what I got to say. Thank you.
Thanks, Cheryl.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor, honorable members of the City Council. My name is Michelle Weinberg. I represent the South Whitefish Neighborhood Association. You have our written comments in your packet, which explain how the proposed zone change fails to comply with the fundamental requirements of zoning set forth under state law and the city's own regulations. It should be noted that the staff report's findings of fact in this regard, including finding of fact numbers 1, 3, 4, 6, 7, 8, 10, and 11, fail to address these requirements, or they do so only with conclusory statements, which of course is insufficient to comply with Montana's zoning laws. I'm going to focus my comments tonight on finding of fact number 1, which neither the applicant nor the staff have addressed how the proposed zoning will impact wildlife and wildlife habitat, given the wetlands, open space, and forested habitats that exist on the property and in the surrounding area. Obviously, this property does not exist in a vacuum. It's part of a larger critical habitat corridor that supports many wildlife species. The growth policy states that the community members that participated in the visioning session prior to the adoption of the 2007 growth policy identified the attributes of the community that they valued the most and that they wanted to see preserved even as the community grows. Among these were small town feel and character, open spaces, scenic vistas, wildlife and wildlife habitat, and public safety. This sentiment is embodied in the very first vision statement in the policy, which states in pertinent part, quote, "We will preserve and enhance our open spaces, wildlife habitat, scenic vistas, and traditional neighborhoods that make our communities special. We will make a special effort to keep our air and water clean," end quote. The public's vision for Whitefish is also encapsulated by the second future land use goal in the policy, which states that the city will, quote, "preserve, enhance, and manage environmentally sensitive areas such as river and stream banks, steep slopes, wetlands, forested areas, and critical wildlife habitat." As you know, the area near the property contains 2 other important natural features in addition to the wetland complex on the property and forested areas on and around the property. That is Blanchard Lake and Lost Coon Lake. As such, the subject property is considered a wildlife corridor for many species as they move between these natural features. The Montana Fish, Wildlife, and Park Species of Special Concern Inventory also indicates that sensitive plant and animal species rely on the area for critical habitat, including songbirds and waterfowl. Bald eagles, a federally protected species under the Golden Bald Eagle Protection Act, have also been observed nesting in the area. The applicant, the staff report, and the Highway 93 South Corridor Plan all fail to describe or address how these environmentally sensitive areas will allow for the requested density on this property. Clearly, the proposal to increase the density of development on this property and thus destroy, fragment, and degrade wildlife habitat through deforestation, road building, pollution, and almost certainly water diversion is clearly inconsistent with the growth policy's directives with respect to wildlife, wildlife habitat, and environmentally sensitive areas. The additional density will also result in more people and their pets living in the area, which of course will result in more human-wildlife conflicts and the disruption of wildlife movement and survivability. Obviously, a mere setback from the wetlands cannot mitigate the impacts of more development density, especially when patios, certain vehicles, lawns, gardens, the application of fertilizer, herbicides, and pesticides, outdoor storage, and tree removal are allowed within the setback. At least one member of this council has stated that housing is the city's #1 priority. That is not consistent with what the public wanted in the visioning sessions before the adoption of the 2007 growth policy. As explained above, this position is clearly at odds with the growth policy's vision for this community as embodied by the 2007 growth policy. Therefore, my client respectfully asks that you deny the zone change request. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Michelle. Appreciate your comments. Further public testimony on this item? Michelle, anyone online wishing to provide comment?
Those of you who are joining the meeting by Teams, if you'd like to raise your hand to speak towards this agenda item, please do so. I think we're good.
Thanks, Michelle. I'll go ahead and close the public hearing and turn it back to the council for preferably a motion one way or the other just to move the meeting along. Ben?
I would move to approve ordinance 23-05 and adopt the finding of fact from the staff report.
Is there a second to the motion?
I second it.
Seconded by Giuseppe. Would you like to speak to your motion?
Yeah, I would just say in the bigger picture, it's as time has gone on, it's become harder for me to understand the presence of 2.5 acre minimum zoning in city-owned or city property that's within the city boundaries. I just think that as the town has grown, that just feels more and more antiquated. So I don't have issue with the developer's request. I do understand the concerns about wetlands, and I do think it is important for development to be considerate of the environment that's around it. I trust that our regulations that we have in place and our engineering standards will address those concerns, and I trust the developer will be thoughtful in the process of developing the property, and I'm sure that we will probably see him back here for the development request later, and we can talk about it further then too. So, thank you.
Thank you, Ben. Further comments? Rebecca?
Yeah, I would rather postpone this decision until we get more information from the Army Corps. It just seems like if it's not done correctly, it could create a lot of water issues for adjacent neighborhoods. And I have lived that myself in my own neighborhood when the engineering wasn't done on my street, and now I'm seeing erosion on my house. And so it's subtle, but it does happen over time, like 10 to 15 years. And I just would rather that we get this done correctly with as much scientific data as we could have. So I will be voting against it today. I would prefer that we had a motion to postpone until we had more of the real reports, but.
Thanks, Rebecca. Further comment from the council? Giuseppe?
I just wanted to reiterate what Councilman Davis said. I fully agree with your statements, and I trust the staff and the planning board.
Thanks, Giuseppe. Steve?
I already made my comments during the planning board meeting about this, and I do just want to add one thing. I know what the 2007 growth policy says, but I think if we took a poll of citizens today, I think, and we hear it all the time, that housing is our #1 priority. I mean, this certainly doesn't solve our housing problem, but by not allowing us to think in the bigger picture, especially about these last tracts of undeveloped land, in a more broad perspective, especially when we're trying to build the Baker Street extension. These things are all going to come in, and they're going to have to come in piecemeal, even though we had at one point a big plan in front of us that would have managed all of it at once. But anyway, I will vote for this, like I did at the planning board meeting.
Thank you, Steve. Andy?
Yeah, I think a couple of comments, and I'll make a comment to Rebecca's concerns. I think we can't not lose sight of what we're actually approving here right now. We're approving a zone change. We're not approving a subdivision, and looking at the granular level of what you're talking about is not something we would do at this point. And while we're approving something that will allow 20,000 square foot lots, we have no idea what the ultimate density would be there until we actually do see what that delineation of the wetlands is, what the setbacks ultimately be, and what is actually left to be developed and can have a lot platted on it. We're not looking at a subdivision here. We're not looking at engineering. We're approving a zone change, and that's a much different thing in my mind. And the wetland issue, while it is an issue, it has, quite frankly, I find very little impact on a zone change. On a subdivision, correct, it has a huge impact. Where those lots get located, how that's dealt with, what mitigation needs to happen, how water moves through and across that property, whether it stands there or whatever, how it affects Cheryl's property, yes, that would get looked at that time. But we're approving a zone change right now, and that's a little bit different level of approval, in my opinion. So,
Thanks, Andy. Rebecca?
It does matter because we are going down to half-acre lots from 2.5-acre lots. So impervious surface does make a difference on how water travels through the landscape. So that's why I wish we would wait a little bit till we had more information.
Further comments from the council? All those in favor of the motion, please raise your hand. Those opposed, like sign, and the motion does carry on a 5-1 vote, with Councilor Norton voting in opposition. Thanks, Carter. Thanks, Michelle. Thanks, Cheryl, for joining us this evening. We'll move on to item 6B, which will be ordinance 23-6, amending zoning regulations of Title 11, Chapter 7, Administration and Enforcement, to add a new section, zoning upon annexation of the Whitefish City Code. And this, again, will be on a first reading. David.
Good evening again. So, yeah, we held several work sessions with the council when we were discussing our annexation policy. The council directed us to look at amending our current policy to allow for zoning upon annexation, similar to how the city of Missoula does that. Under Montana state law, we can annex property at the exact same time as we add the city zoning over that, based on 76-2-303-3A. And so anytime there's a zone change, or anytime property annexes into the city, we have to get rid of the county zoning and apply city zoning. The old process would take several months. We'd have to, once the annexation was approved, we'd have to advertise and send out notices and get it on the planning board agenda, and then go through council and multiple hearings. And so it was generally 3 or 4 months later when our city zoning would apply. And so with this process, there'll be a resolution of intent to annex, and then at a later meeting, we'll have the zone change and annexation with a public hearing, which then the council can approve. And there's also an option within this that the council could assign an interim zoning, knowing that it may change to something different later, which the applicant would have to, apply for himself or something. And so, yeah, the text of the zone change is in there. It's basically consistent with state law, talking about authorizing land uses comparable to the land uses authorized by the county, authorizing land uses that are consistent with land uses approved by the Board of County Commissioners or the Board of Adjustment. And in the county, the Board of Adjustment approves conditional uses, and so that's something that we have to consider as well, because any conditional uses that are approved in the county would be carried over, and we'd have to honor those in the city. And then it has to also be, or additionally be consistent with our growth policy. And so it outlines the procedure from that, which is similar to our other zone changes, other than it's something that happens a much quicker process through the city council. So looking at that, it is in accordance with the growth policy, due to the fact that when a property annexes in the city and receives its city zoning, the city can ensure its zone and develop consistent with our growth policy. It promotes compatible urban growth as it helps eliminate lag times between annexation of a property and the application of city zoning. There's a lot of confusion on what would happen if someone brought forward a development project while it's still under county zoning, and how we would apply that, and I think we would have to honor the county zoning with whatever happened. And so getting rid of that lag time, I think, eliminates a potential issue in the future. So staff did recommend approval of this. It did go to the Whitefish Planning Board on March 16th, And then the planning board unanimously recommended approval. We had no one that spoke at the public hearing. Be glad to answer any questions if you have any.
Any questions for Director Taylor? Ben?
I've got a couple, if you wouldn't mind bearing with me for 1 second. So I'm looking at the language of what's being proposed on page 82 of our packet, and I've got some wording questions. So it says, the first sentence, it says, part 1, it says timing. It says a city zoning district classification may be assigned to a property annexed into the city at the time of annexation. Why does it say may be assigned instead of will be assigned?
I mean, I think there's the option that the city council can assign it then, or maybe can also do an interim zoning is the intent of that. So I can ask Angie if she has any other clarification, because she helped me draft the language.
So Ben, if a city zoning is applied at the time of annexation, it needs to meet the statutory requirements. If it doesn't, for instance, if it's not comparable with county zoning, then we would have to go through a different process, which might include interim zoning. So in order for both of them to happen simultaneously, it actually has to meet the statutory requirements. So.
But we are, as a matter of policy, we will be doing zoning hearings at every annexation, right? It's not an optional thing.
Well, if it's comparable, if it meets the statutory requirements, yeah, we'll be doing them at the same time. But say somebody wants to annex, but they want a zone that's completely different than county zoning, then we would either have to do interim zoning, because we couldn't do it at the same time, or we would have to just hold it later.
Yeah, hold off on the annexation. Yeah.
I'm a little confused by what, so if it's different than the county zoning, we can't assign it a different zone?
So, I mean, in the past, we've had people that have applied to annex, right? And then, you know, we would either zone it, the applicable, our equivalent of county zoning, say it was a 10,000 square foot lot, county zone, and we would give it our 10,000 square foot city zoning lot. If they wanted something different, and it was something that we couldn't, as staff, support directly, then we would make them go through would become the applicant rather than the city. They had to go to the planning board and make their case. They had to show how it's consistent with the growth policy. In some cases, they had to come in with a growth policy amendment. And so all those cases, you know, there's times where someone annexes and they don't necessarily want the equivalent zoning, or they don't want what's consistent with our growth policy. This is for cases where it does that, and if it doesn't, then the council could say, well, we're still going to give you the equivalent zoning. If you want something different, you're going to have to go back through the process. And so, you know, apply separately and, you know, make their own case for it. Because in this case, when it's a annexation, staff's the one that brings forward the request so that we can apply our zoning to it.
Do we have to weigh the county zoning? Is that
that's state law? Yeah, I mean, it's part of the requirement.
If we're doing it simultaneously, yes, we do, Ben. If not, again, if they want something completely different, if the city wants something completely different, then we can do, our policy is not to downzone people, but that doesn't mean we can't downzone people.
Frank?
Frank.
Query for you, Counselor. I thought one of the additional motives under state law is that we could zone them equivalent of the county, or what our zoning would call for
in our growth policy.
In our growth policy.
Yeah, correct.
Is that correct? So it doesn't have to be the equivalent of the county zoning. It can be what we would have zoned it if it were in, correctly?
That is correct, yeah. It could be our growth policy too, but again, we need to, that's the process we're going through of updating our growth policy to figure out what we would want to zone them as.
Right. But for example, the Highway 93 corridor plan and the Whitefish transitional zone, if somebody wanted to annex, we would not have to bring them in as the county equivalent. We could bring them in as Whitefish transitional.
What's consistent with our growth policy, yeah.
And that would be consistent with our growth policy.
Right.
Correct, thank you.
And that, just to follow up on that, in that example, that would be done at the time of the annexation, not in the following hearing, right?
Yeah, it's interesting. Actually, state law for annexation by petition doesn't even call for a hearing, so it's a little bit of an anomaly in state law. So we've traditionally, when people want to annex by petition, we've just done it literally on the consent agenda because state law does not call for a hearing. But in this case, we would do them simultaneously, yes. But then again, if it wasn't consistent with our gross policy or with what the county had them zoned, if they wanted something like completely different, then yeah, we'd have to do some interim zoning because as Dave said, there's this lag transition between annexation and the zone where they could probably do anything they wanted to do without a building permit. So this would just take care of cases where it was consistent with our growth policy or with the county zoning.
I mean, would it not be possible to, no matter what the circumstances, just do it all together? I mean, if they wanted to do a growth policy amendment or whatever, just put it all in the same thing?
It's a way bigger process for a growth policy amendment. That has to go to the planning board. There has to be, public hearings and go through a different process. This is an expedited process so that, the annexation can happen in a timely manner, and then the zone change is just a simpler thing. If it's 90% of the time, it's an easy, switch to the city zoning because it's something, that's been the same anyway, or was that same zoning when Whitefish had that jurisdiction previously for 20 or 30 years in the past. So, like most of the stuff around Whitefish has only had county zoning on it for the last, 7 or 8 years. So.
Okay. Do you think we should have criteria by which to evaluate these applications?
We have criteria for zone changes that are in our code, and then we would look at those same criteria, just like we do any zone change. Those we'd have to have findings for each of those things. And staff will put together a staff report, somewhat truncated because it's not going to the planning board, but evaluating those things, evaluating the consistency with the growth policy, and making a recommendation about what the zoning should be.
And Ben, as far as annexation goes, I mean, there's just, unfortunately, the statutes are really old, and there's really no criteria. You guys can accept or decline a petition for annexation on its merits, and what's in the best interest of the city, whatever that means. So,
sure.
I mean, you can always refuse to annex something if you don't want to annex it.
Yep. And then my last question is, none of this goes to the planning board, is that correct?
It just goes straight to the city council, yep.
What do you think about that?
I mean, that's part of the reason why it's a truncated process. I think, it's a longer process to set it up for the planning board and get through that to get to the council. Under state law, it's not a requirement because it's really, it has to be applied. And so the window of decision making is pretty narrow on what kinds of zones can be, applied there, and either has to be part of the, consistent with our growth policy or the equivalent of the county zoning. So, if it's a much more complicated thing, then I think there's an opportunity for the council to put, some interim thing in place and have it go through another process.
Okay, thank you.
Frank, did you have further comments, questions?
Angie, I think you kind of answered my question. Is this will come to the council with a whatever zoning designation, either be it our growth policy designation for it or the county equivalent. We can then analyze the annexation based after the public hearing as to whether or not that particular piece of property zoned that way we want in the city.
Correct.
We can that's unilaterally, we can't be challenged. We just say, we don't want it, goodbye.
Yeah, whether or not you guys want to annex a piece of property is up to you.
Okay.
I mean, within reason. I mean,
Right.
there should be findings, but
Yeah. Okay.
you don't have to take property into the city. So
That's, okay, good. That was what I thought was nice about this process, is that you'll see how it would come into the city, and we can say, no, we really don't want that. So, thanks.
Rebecca.
So I was on the planning board when we annexed every single meeting, lots and lots of property because we lost the donut. Dave, is there any unintended consequence that you can think of? Because it seems like a really good idea to me.
Yeah, I mean, that's why we support it. We think it's going to be just a better process in general and simpler. But, I've always been concerned about that lag time, because there's been times where, the planning board hasn't liked the zoning, when someone, applies for it after an annexation, and so it gets held up, and it could be 6 months in between where we still has a county zoning on a piece of property, and, a lot can happen in that 6 months.
Yeah, I just don't remember people even showing up at these annexation hearings. I mean, nobody, I can't remember in 4 years, anybody ever opposing it from the public.
When we were forcibly annexing people, we definitely had some people that weren't really
that's
happy.
true.
This is mostly going to apply to people that want to annex in, because they want our services. They want to get off their septic system. They want to get on city sewer, or they need water. So, yeah.
So Rebecca, if we're forcibly annexing people, either contiguous properties or when they're wholly surrounded, yes, they do show up, but generally with petitions for, and they do have the right to a hearing. With petitions for annexation, there's no necessarily right to a hearing in front of the city council. So they're asking us, and we generally do it because we would like to put our zoning on them and have some sort of control over how those properties develop.
Thank you.
When we forcibly annex, because they're usually already on our services, or they're wholly surrounded and they have to use our roads, and so.
Yeah, I know that's controversial, but thank you for that.
Just had one follow-up question. Just to make sure I'm crystal clear. So if you have a parcel that is, the county zoning is one thing, and then the city, either growth planning or whatever the council's perception of what this parcel should be is something different, exactly what happens?
I think the evaluation will take place. Staff will look at existing county zoning. We'll look at what the growth policy calls for. We'll lay out a recommendation for you guys, and then you guys can choose which of those is the most appropriate. Whether it's the one that's closest to the growth policy, or it's, the county equivalent makes the most sense.
That is at the same hearing,
And
the
that's
same time.
the same time that you decide to annex it. Yep. You'll have an intent to annex, letting everyone know. We'll advertise a public hearing. If anyone wants to come and bring comments, that's when the staff will talk about the zoning, and then you guys can discuss it, and then you can decide whether you want the property and what the zoning should be.
Would that come through as one motion?
Great question.
You want to answer it, Dave?
It should. It should.
Yeah, it probably should.
Yep.
Yeah, if they're coming through as one hearing, it should come through as one motion.
Should that be articulated in this ordinance?
No, I don't think so. I think
No,
that's
it's
probably
Robert
just a
rules.
matter of procedure. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Further questions for staff? Not seeing any. We did advertise for a public hearing on ordinance 23-6. We'll hold that public hearing now. Anyone wishing to provide testimony, name and address for the record, please, Mary.
Good evening, Mary Flowers, Citizens for a Better Flathead, 135 South Main in Kalispell. As we have stated at your earlier workshops on this zone, but our comments weren't considered in the staff report or in the discussion of this before you tonight. We strongly urge the council to rely on the provisions of MCA 7-24601, and we've copied that on the next page for your review. This is specific to annexation by petition in amending your annexation standards, and to not rely on MCA 762303 as is proposed. We're concerned that by relying on the 762-303, it would put into the city's zoning regulations unnecessary conditions to what zoning may apply, or to be forced to comply through litigation by an unhappy property owner who wanted you to comply with the county zoning, which you're not required to do. if it's consistent with your growth policy. The city's almost exclusive means of annexation is by petition of the property owners. The MCA 7-2-4601 permits you to approve or deny annexation request by petition simply on the merit of the proposal, and I include the language there. The governing body may approve or disapprove the petition submitted under provisions of subsection 3A on its merits. When the governing body approves the petition, it shall pass a resolution providing for annexation. There's no need for you, and we've included a suggestion for editing the zone text before you tonight. In the next, it's kind of a grade text, unfortunately, but we're suggesting that the underlying text be added and that the conditions that are from the other statute, 76-2-303, be eliminated. We do not believe that you need to encumber your zoning regulations with that statute. We think it's sufficient that you are allowed to annex simply on the merits. Your questions tonight to your staff confirm that you have the ability to approve or deny this on its merits, and I think it's just inviting litigation if you go into the specifics of amending your zoning regulations to add the additional text that we're saying you should remove. So you're frowning at me. I'm not sure if that means I'm not being clear. Oh, sorry. Okay. I do want to be clear, so I'm sorry. Well, I thank you for the clarification. I would also ask that as you move forward in adopting this, you're required to adopt a staff report and findings. And I believe it's incorrect to say, and this is on page 90 of 102 of your packet in the staff report, it says, under Montana state law, property annexing from a county to a city must change the county zoning to a city zoning that is either the closest equivalent to the previous zoning or is consistent with the land uses outlined in the growth policy. That is not the only option you have. As we're saying, you have the option of annexing under 7-2-4601. And I encourage you to rely on that. Let's see. Also, I would ask you to remove from the staff report, and I'm on the second page of my comments, at the top there, I removed the following as the only controlling option as to what a city may consider. And again, this only refers to 76-303. And you need to recognize that you have considerable rights under 7-2-4601. And I think this is much too narrow a drafting of this ordinance before you tonight. I would either remove that language and just refer to the ability to annex upon petition. And finally, at the last planning board meeting, we submitted comments of concern about the annexation that you were kind of caught on having to move forward with the property at Highway 40. And we feel like you weren't really presented the full range of options as you went through the process for the adoption of the business transitional zone. And then when that annexation came to you, all of a sudden, well, it was suggested that your hands were tied. I am concerned that if you move forward with this annexation wording as it is, that will also complicate that final process of adopting the zoning that is going through the planning board. And I think it's really important to understand how what you do on this might impact that. And I had one more point, and the other thing was that I believe, and maybe Dana can help me out here, there's a bill at the legislature that would authorize you to adopt this zoning consistently with your annexation, which I guess has been a little bit unclear in the statute. And it might be good to have that bill, whether it's gone through or it's still in process, to understand how that might impact what you're considering tonight. Dana, I don't know if you are familiar with that.
Can you clarify again what the purpose of that bill was?
The purpose of the bill, and it might have been part of the Montana, the League of Cities planning bill, but it clearly authorizes cities to hold joint hearings for annexation and zoning.
I don't know a specific bill like that, so it might be within Senate Bill 382.
Okay, thank you.
Mary, I think Giuseppe had a question for you.
Sure.
Are you finished first?
I am, thank you. I can provide a copy of the comments I did for the planning board. I didn't have enough to hand out, but I'll give that to Michelle for you.
And that's where I was going. I was reading the minutes of the planning board meeting, in which they approved this unanimously, and I was wondering why your organization didn't make any public comment there.
Because this is an incredibly busy time of year with the legislature in session, and we simply didn't have time. So that's why I'm here tonight.
Any further questions for Mary? Thanks very much, Mary.
Thank you.
Further public comment this evening on this item? Michelle, anyone online wishing to testify?
For those of you attending virtually, if you'd like to speak towards this public hearing, please raise your hand. I think we're good. Thanks, John.
Thank you. I'll go ahead and close the public hearing and turn it back to the council for preferably a motion to move this forward.
Mr. Mayor, I would move to table ordinance 2306 to a date certain, which would be our next council meeting, for reconsideration.
That gets no discussion. Is there a second to the motion? Seconded by Councilor Norton. Frank, would you? No, that doesn't get any discussion. All those in favor, please raise your hand.
I really need to say something.
Okay, go ahead.
At the next planning board meeting, that the zone change is up again for that property at the corner of 93 and 40. I just want you to be aware of that. And it's sitting there in limbo with no zone, no city zoning on it, but county zoning.
Rebecca?
I guess I would like staff, if they could, to look at what's going on in Senate Bill 382 and see that and combine some of Mary's comments too. It sounds like her comments would protect us more. So that would be desirable. Thank you. Not to add one more bill to your plate, Dana, but I know you're already tracking that one. And Dave, too. Thank you.
That is Senate Bill 382, and it does state, a municipality shall review and consider a proposed annexation in conjunction with the zoning regulations for the property to be annexed pursuant to another section within this bill, following the procedures set forth. And so I believe that what we're proposing is looking at zoning and annexation together in accordance with the growth policy or county zoning. This bill is looking at doing a whole different way of planning and zoning and growth policies. So I think that the intent is, you already know what zoning is going to be applicable to the property, so you look at it at annexation. We will not be implementing this bill. We have 3 years to implement this bill when passed, so it's not going to be immediate. So that I do know for sure. We will have to take time to address this bill, and we have 3 years for implementation.
Saw Frank's hand, and then Steve.
Two things. I would like to at least inform the council what my motivation here is that I think there are some pretty important considerations for us that I'd like us to have a couple of weeks to consider whether or not our, shall we say, regulatory reference to how we're going to manage our annexations should be whether under one provision or another or both. I think we need to analyze that given what I've heard tonight, because I think the whole point of our of wanting to go this direction is so that we can, for lack of a better term, accept the project or the development as zoned as it's proposed, or reject it. We can do that either way. And so what I want to do is analyze whether we're restricted either way. In terms of Steve's comments earlier about what's happening with the Highway 40 property, I'm not going to say I told you so, but I'm going to tell you that that was my concern when we approved that annexation initially and did not table it or delay it. I think Angie will tell you that whether we pass this tonight or not, it does not apply and will not apply to that property. So your flexibility is what it was when we annexed it and not what it might be in the future. So I'm playing devil's advocate here. So just so you know where we really are, this will have no effect on that property. None.
Steve.
I guess I should ask Angie, have you done the analysis of these two different laws, two different sections of the code, that which one is better, or?
They're both cohesive. So you can annex via petition. So what this change does basically is allow you to annex and zone at the same time. There's no.
In terms of rejecting something, are we more open to a lawsuit if as written versus these comments that Mary's brought us, is my question.
I mean, I think, again, they're cohesive. You can annex by petition. This just provides an easier way to do it if the zoning is consistent either with your growth policy or with county zoning. It just deletes the lag time in annexing. So, annexation by petition, you guys do it all the time. You do it on your consent agenda, and then we have to go through the entire process of zoning, and we bring forth that zoning request because they have asked to be within city limits. So I don't see them as not married together. State law is weird. Again, you guys don't even require to have a hearing on a petition for annexation. So I don't know that it hurts you in any way. I do understand kind of the wisdom in seeing what happens with 382.
So we do have, okay, I get that part for sure, but.
Yeah, Missoula, I mean, this is kind of based on Missoula's plan, how they do it. Well, so I don't think that the statutes are not married together. They're just a little strange.
Okay. I mean, okay. Well, what Mary seems to be proposing here is that if we deny an annexation because we just don't want on the merits of an annexation, the language in MCA 724601 seems to be stronger that we're allowed to do that and with less likelihood of being sued if they don't get the zoning that they want at the time of annexation.
Well, you can always deny an annexation. I mean, it's on its merits. This, again, just is it's marrying state law. It's just streamlining the process for somebody to come forward with an annexation and a zoning change right at once.
Thank you. That's the
I mean, you can always
there's
tell.
There's nothing that prevents us from saying no, we don't want to annex you.
No, I mean, you guys should probably have some good findings, but you can always deny an annexation.
Giuseppe.
And Mr. Mayor, this is more to clarify procedurally. If we table this tonight, are we giving instruction to staff to redraft or draft differently? So we will look at a differently drafted ordinance. And if that's the case, I would ask to consider that it goes through the planning board again first.
Frank, what was your intent of the motion or direction back to staff?
Well, I would have had direction. After our discussion here, I am going to move to withdraw, if the second will allow me to withdraw the motion to table and make another motion.
Is that okay with the second? Okay. Frank?
Sure. Can I ask
Steve.
one more quick question? I just want to make sure I heard you right, Dana, that no matter what happens with 382, we need something in place in the 3-year. We're not going to start, that's not going to start affecting us immediately. For 3 years, we're not going to have to live by those rules yet.
Correct. 382 has a 3-year implementation window for those that have not adopted a growth policy within the past 5 years. And that includes the entire bill, is my understanding. Regardless, what is written in that bill mimics state law anyways with how we're proposing this amendment. You're looking at zoning with annexation and how it's in accordance with your growth policy. This also has county zoning.
Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. Frank.
Mr. Mayor, I would like to move to approve ordinance 2306, an ordinance amending the zoning regulations, Title 11, Chapter 7, Administration and Enforcement, and add a new section, zoning upon annexation of the Whitefish City Code, first reading.
Is there a second to the
I'll
motion?
second.
Seconded by Councilor Cornell. Further discussion? All those in favor, please raise your hand. Those opposed, like sign, and the motion does carry unanimously. Thank you, Frank. We'll move on to item 7, communications from our city manager, Dana Smith. You have Dana's report enclosed with the packet. Any questions for Dana? Not seeing any, Dana. Anything additional to report on?
I'll give you just a brief update on Senate Bill 528. There's been some changes to the bills, other bills that are listed here. Most of them are moving forward if it says they are, or dead, but Senate Bill 268, thanks to everybody in the community and surrounding areas that sent in comments. I think we really helped to kill that bill. That was the short-term rental bill. Senate Bill 528 had a hearing last week. Thank you, Mayor Mulford, for being our voice at that hearing. The League of Cities and Towns did propose amendments to that bill and tried to work with Senator Hertz, who actually has carried some amendments. However, he did not agree to all the amendments proposed by the League of Cities and Towns, such as the removal of the prohibition on parking requirements, impact fees, and some other minor changes. The League does not support the proposed amendments because they aren't all encompassing of the amendments that they asked for. The amendments do allow for some, it's a little bit better, like setbacks, height has to mimic the main home. And then the sizing was somewhat adjusted to be 75% of the main structure up to 1,000 square feet. So that is in the proposed amendment. The committee can choose to pass with amendments or not. So there's still, time to be determining what they're doing. If it is passed with amendments, it will go back to, let's see here, we're in the House. So it'll go back to Senate, and it has to meet transmittal, and it's a revenue bill because they added $250 or something. That will have a transmittal date later in April, like the last week. So stay tuned, but as proposed amendments, they're not supported. I got a lot of feedback from council also that you guys still do not support it with amendments. I've passed that on to our lobbyists who will be working this week, talking to committees members on House local government. Wow. Other than that, I will say that House Bill 943 that we did support in essence that would have changed the taxation for short-term rentals being residential to commercial. That one did get tabled in committee, so that won't be moving forward likely. And however, House Bill 244 that would revise laws governing the Montana Housing Fund, that was concurred by committee on the 13th, so we'll probably see that move forward. With that, that's all I have today.
Thanks, Dana. Appreciate the updates. We'll move on to item 8. We did not make appointments earlier to our volunteer board. We did interview 8 candidates for the Whitefish Sustainable Tourism Management Plan Standing Committee. Those are mayoral appointments that require your ratification, so I'll go ahead and make those appointments now. I would motion to approve Stephen Kane as a member at large residing inside Whitefish to the 2-year term. Mariah as the WCVB representative, Elizabeth Colley as the member at large residing outside of the city of Whitefish. Move to appoint Mark and that would be a one-year term, Michelle. I would move to appoint Mark Piscoli as the member at large outside of City of Whitefish to the one-year term. Nick Columbus is the Whitefish Mountain Resort representative. Ella Colbelt for the member at large residing inside City Whitefish for the 2-year term. Heather Kaufman, member at large residing inside Whitefish for a 1-year term. And Brian Schott, member at large residing in Whitefish for a 2-year term. Those are my selections, and I just need a showing of hands to ratify those appointments. Okay, and that passes on a 5 unanimous vote of those present. Rebecca abstaining from the vote, given her absence from the work session. Thanks very much. So we do have a letter, and I think I've distributed that, at least to the left of me, to the right, that we drafted for regarding railroad safety to our representatives. If you wouldn't mind putting pen to your signature, I'd appreciate that, and I'll circulate that back to Dana. We can start with councilor comments. Who would like to begin? Andy.
I was just going to say we need a city staff member in council, and I think Michelle's
Oh,
our
correct.
city staff member.
Sorry about that, Michelle. And my motion included Michelle as the staff appointment. Is that okay with the council? Okay, good. Sorry, Michelle. Andy.
And I would do the council spot.
I think it was one or the other, correct? Yeah.
Was it one or the other? You just fired. Oh, okay.
Yeah, you just fired yourself.
Great. One member, all right, awesome.
We can rock, paper, scissors for this position if you really want to.
I may still come anyway, so there you go. I can just sit around in the cheap seats and throw peanuts. No, I have no comments, thank you.
Thanks, Andy. Rebecca?
I do. I just wanted to clarify, when we do these comments, how much time do I get? So, because I don't want to get cut off. Like, I feel like, should I limit it to a certain amount of time? Like 5 minutes is max, 3 minutes is?
Take your time.
Yeah, okay. First off, Craig, the pond at the Riverside Park, I don't think it was dredged last fall. I was wondering, is it impossible to dredge it in the spring?
Yeah, it would need to be a fall project. So we are carrying money over, proposing to carry money over in the fiscal '24 budget for that pond dredging this coming fall.
Okay, it just looks kind of worse and worse, and it goes right into the river. So people are commenting on it in the neighborhood. But okay, and then Maria, there's a blue porta potty at the Riverside Park footbridge. Is that permanent, or what is that for?
That is there for the summer to help with individuals getting off of the river and needing a bathroom facility. We received a lot of public comment last year that individuals were needing to have a facility in order to be able to do that. So we've provided one.
Would it be possible to move it north along the trail a little bit? Just there's so many people that take pictures there on the river, on the footbridge. And I know there's a lot of teenage activity. I'm afraid that it might get tipped over, and I can talk to you about that. But I just was wondering if it was for an event or if you were actually going to leave it there. It's a lot of families take pictures there, and now there's a porta potty. And I'm just wondering if we could move it a little bit off to the side. But thank you. And then the picking up of leaves, is that still happening for people?
Yes, we are vacuuming leaves this spring. We're not picking up bagged leaves anymore, but we started last week with the leaf vacuum again.
Is there anything you want the people to know?
Well, so do not place leaves in the street. That's probably the key, is keep them just off. If you have a boulevard, they should go on the boulevard. If there's no curb or gutter, they should just be off the edge of the street.
I just want to say this is so fantastic that you're doing this, because for years and years, Purple Frog took bags, but they were never able to be organic because of it. But thank you. It's going to make a big difference. And then on Senate Bill 528, I think the House Local Government is meeting tomorrow, Dana, at 3 p.m., right? So if that bill passes, this is the one that would allow ADUs anywhere and everywhere up to 1,000 square feet, what Dana was just talking about. So if people have not written in yet, that would be a really important one to write to the committee members to say that Whitefish does not want that. We have had discussions about our ADU program because we're kind of worried that the sponsor might have modeled that statewide bill on our own program, because we tried to incentivize workforce housing, but in the last year that we've had it in place, we've received no workforce housing ADUs. We've only had 7 produced, likely because of the expense of building. But people are planning, our staff member told us that they were used for workspace, visitors, only one of them that she knew of was being rented even. So if people don't want ADUs everywhere up to 1,000 square feet, they should write in to the House Local Government Committee that meets tomorrow at 3 to say no. That's all. Thank you.
Thanks, Rebecca. Ben?
I do have 2 questions of staff, if that's okay. The first would be if there's any update on the BNSF oil sheen in the river.
I have not received an update since last week that I sent on to council. They're still investigating it, and to my knowledge, they anticipate it probably be closed at least through this week. I'm not sure if Maria or Craig has heard anything.
No, the last update that I had was the one from Matt Jones, I think on Wednesday or Thursday of last week.
Did you receive the update I sent?
Yeah.
That did make it to your inbox? Okay, good.
Yeah. How bad is it? I'm just curious.
It's not bad.
It was very small, a very
insignificant.
small portion, and the booms that were placed is, keeping whatever there was there safe. So they acted immediately, and we appreciate it, and they contacted us as soon as they learned about it. So they've been great to work with. Matt Jones is keeping us updated as much as possible. And so we're kind of passing the info on to our media outlets because they seem to reach out to us first. But I did confirm with Matt Jones I was able to provide the update that they gave us last week was still okay today.
Great. And the only other question I had was, I think you'd mentioned this before, but do we have a work session scheduled to review the zoning changes coming out of session this year and react to them?
So we will have eventually schedule a work session. Really, we'll be looking at the city council priorities, and a lot of what we have planned might be pushed a little bit to react to some of these, such as the lakeshore protection zone regulations. That bill did pass, and in May, I'm scheduled to go over to Billings to meet with the city managers and the League of Cities and Towns to discuss what occurred during the legislative session and what the plan is moving forward. Senate Bill 379, I think it was failed, and that one, I think there was concerns on, potentially cities needing to go forward with litigation because of the process that was not followed by the state. But that bill was, it failed reading or was tabled, I can't recall exactly. So after that May meeting, I'll have more information, and the league will put out their final end of session report that we'll discuss. So we'll work on scheduling a work session. You're probably looking at June or July.
Thanks, Ben. Frank?
Nothing this evening. Thank you.
Thank you. Steve?
I just want to give a shout out to the weather. It's been nice. And gotten in a bike ride already this year. And then a friend of mine texted me a picture of what he did today. His name's Eli Nagel. He lives in those blue apartments right across from City Beach. I can't ever remember the name of them. Alpen something, I think. He went out there and he swept all the gravel off of the pedestrian side of the road so that it was safe for people to ride their bikes on the pedestrian part of that road. So he went out there and did it himself. So I think that deserves a recognition.
Down Skiles.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay. That's all I have.
Absolutely. And Giuseppe? Nothing tonight. Craig, striping. Citywide striping. Can you give us an update?
Yeah, it's that time of year where we always get questions about striping. We typically start our striping in late May or early June. It's simply because the ground temperatures need to warm up a little bit more. We do have paint this year, and I also do have a contractor that we worked with last year, Cook Painting, that did a number of crosswalks for us at night. One of the things we really struggle with is crosswalks, because trying to do them during the day when traffic is busy and we have to do them half at a time. So he's done a lot of night work for us in the past, and so I'm going to employ that service as well. But
Great.
We got lots of curbs, we got lots of crosswalks, we got lots of long lines, and we do have the supplies to do it. So.
Great. Thank you very much. I think that's all I had. Anything further from staff? How about council? We are adjourned. Thanks.